All right, Toothers. It's been a weird few days. I've tried a couple recordings recently and have decided they're not worthy. They're not worth sharing. There's probably snippets of value in them, but I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe I'm too hard on myself. Maybe I'm just going with my gut. But ultimately, you don't know what you're missing. So, yeah, go. Turn, commit to the turn. Let's go. Turn. Make the turn. God, people. What was I talking about? Yeah, so one of the topics I'm going to cover today anyway, I'm going to try again to cover it because it's rattling around in my head. And for those of you thinking about the obvious joke, yes, there's clearly plenty of room. And if not, turkeys. If not, I appreciate you not being correct. So, all right, the naming conventions blog post. It was reasonably interesting, I thought. There's a lot to cover still that I think is better suited in other topics and other discussions. I have also received some feedback about it already, and I've made a couple of updates because there were things that I clearly did not pay attention to or worded wrong. I need to reread everything that I post like right after I post it because I always find some kind of mistake, right? A random word out of place or just the wrong word being typed in, all just in general. So I'm glad when people point out things that I've missed. Obviously, you want to put out a perfect product right away, but it's clearly not how I operate. I try to put out a better product, but perfect, no. I mean, the other recordings were not that they weren't perfect, but they were not great. I don't think there was enough meat there to sustain people. I don't know why I'm going with a food allegory. I just ate lunch. But, I mean, and the other topic, honestly, it really came down to this concept of we don't always get to choose when we have to make a decision that we may not want to make, or we may not, appreciate what it does for us or to us. When you find yourself in a situation where you need to do something and you don't have the ambition for it, or you feel like it's not brought to you in a way that you would prefer. You feel like there's ulterior motives from people, whatever. At the end of the day, though, right? What is it that you're really trying to resist? What is the thing that you're complaining about? What is the fight that you want to have about the situation? And is that fight worth it? Sometimes it's just not. And you don't want to get into a situation or into a cycle where you become a doormat. Man, a lot of it is, choose your battles, right? Don't neglect yourself at the expense of others, certainly not all the time. I think it's worth being able to consider what a situation will do to you physically, mentally, etc. And sometimes you're just not able to meet the needs of the other people, which also goes back to this concept I'm trying to figure out. You may remember the write-up about choices being beneficial or detrimental. That's on a personal level. I don't remember if I mentioned anything about how it affects other people, but I am trying to figure out how to come up with a way to visualize how it affects other people, which to me is somewhere between a Venn diagram or a three-dimensional Venn diagram, just a bunch of bubbles, essentially connected, and trying to figure out how that all plays out. So I'm wanting to do more thought about the things that I want to create, less diatribes with the things we already know are bad or are coming. I do have some books that I still want to read that will go through kind of that social justice warrior side of things, but also just from the historical perspective, this is how things have been done in this country. This is how the United States formed. These are all the people that were exploited. These are the people that were probably going to, exploit. Again, it's. I know that there's that push from the GOP, or what is now the GOP, about you don't love America, leave it. Just really, you don't love the United States, leave it, because America covers a whole half of the planet technically, and we are not the center of it. And I mean not geographically. I mean of importance. We are not the center of America. They're just another piece of it, which actually oddly segues into the other discussion that I was having trouble with, which, again, I started thinking about because of the naming convention blog post, the Oxfam guide, and that's just labels, right? How we label everything. And yeah, everything should have some kind of a name. We should have some kind of generic understanding of a thing, whatever it happens to be, and a label helps provide that, right? Having being able to look at me and seeing a fat, white, middle-aged male. Cool. You would assume that I am cisgender, but you would have known that without asking me or me volunteering that information. I also largely feel like that's irrelevant, but I'll get into that. And I think the labels also fall under a certain amount of stereotyping that I think we miss or we neglect, certainly in terms of the trans community, or people who just like to cross-dress or present themselves as a different gender, for whatever reasons, right? I think the situation is still largely, well, what's your name, right? Who are you? And not what are you? Because what we all are is people. And if you're not causing harm to others, I'm not sure what the problem is. But I'm trying to keep my metric a little broad, not vague necessarily, but I shaved and now I've got hairs randomly falling off my face. And I shaved a while ago. I think I would have picked it up by now, especially when I was having lunch. I need to cut those. Anyway, what were we talking about? So, yeah, I feel like the trans thing exposes that a lot because, when you look at another person, you're making judgments. And I know there are people that claim they don't judge other people, don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do it. Just do it differently. And sometimes the judgment is like, hey, that's cool. Sometimes it's, hey, I don't like that. And other times it's, I don't care, right? If you're of a different level of skin tone than I am, right? Whatever the colors are going to be, I don't care. I used to be a guy that fell into the game of, well, I don't see color. Well, I see it. I don't stereotype it. That's not sufficient enough for me to decide if I'm going to be concerned about a person or not. And to be honest with you, I think one of my favorite examples of this discussion or this concept actually comes from Hitchens. For those of you unaware, Christopher Hitchens was a staunch atheist. He was a writer, a reporter, a journalist. He traveled all around the world. He wrote a lot of interesting things. One of the books that I do want to get. I do what I don't. I feel like I know enough to kind of start with. But he wrote a book basically about how Mother Teresa should not be lauded for anything. About the work that she did was really to embrace suffering, and that all of the people that came to her had to embrace suffering. She wasn't helping people, right? She wasn't providing a hospital service. It just seemed like everything was hospice, which was, you're going to die, and you're just going to die here. So, and then just some of the hypocrisy of being her, as far as herself getting sick and not enjoying the suffering, but instead going to, world-class hospitals to try to get better. There's definitely more to it. If I wanted to do a deep dive in it, I could. There's still some highlights worth mentioning, I suppose, but It's still a matter of who you look to, right? Who you look up to. You see what issues they bring with them, and when you actually have the whole picture, you start to understand where the flaw is. You start to understand where the story you're being told isn't correct, right? It's meant to evoke emotion in you, which is fine in some respects, but it's based wholly on a lie or a series of lies or a series of a twisted view of the world that you have to accept in order to agree that something is worth it, right? I mean, I mentioned Gandhi in another uh, recording recently, and I think I mentioned his virulent racism. That was in his early years. He did turn from that path and became very anti-racist as he got older, which I was not aware of at the time. So, I have no problem putting it on record. I think I put it in the description of the audio there. Um, but as he got older, he still, slept naked with underage girls. Certainly his grandniece. Um,
Hey, Al, this is future me or editing me. I realized listening to the episode that I made a comment about Hitchens, and then I never got back to the point that he made. It's actually quite a long point. I will try to summarize it a little bit, but I've got his book open right now. God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. So, for those of you who may wonder where I get some of my ideas from, yeah, some of it is just Hitchens reminding me some of the reasons why, at a broader scale, why I have issues with religion in general. And I should point out that he's not a hero of mine. I think he was initially, but again, the more you learn about a person, the more you're like, oh, he's still just people. Yeah, he has some ideas that I do not agree with. I won't go into those right now. But yeah, he was not a perfect person by any stretch, and I'm pretty sure he's talked about that himself. So I'm not treading any new ground here. But I think he makes some interesting points. So he actually talks about in the book how right before September 11th, he was on a panel with Dennis Prager. And for any of you unfamiliar with Dennis Prager, good. But he is a religiously minded blowhard who lies constantly. He's got his Prager University, which is not a university. It's just a collection of propagandist videos from various right-wing pundits. He's clearly on a mission to irritate me anyway. I don't know. Anyway, so Hitch says that he was challenged to answer what Prager referred to as a straight yes or no question, which you will find out it's not a straight yes or no question. But he asked would Hitch had felt safer or less safe if he was to learn that a group of men approaching him had come from a prayer meeting. And, that's a pretty vague. I mean, look, the question, of course, he's trying to evoke is very simply that, religious people are probably more peaceful. And certainly the religious people that he would want to present are going to be more peaceful. So I'm going to quote Hitch directly here. Just to stay within the letter B, I have actually had that experience in Belfast, Beirut, Bombay, Belgrade, Bethlehem, and Baghdad. In each case, I can say absolutely and give my reasons why I would feel immediately threatened if I thought that the group of men approaching me in the dusk were coming from a religious observance. So it's it's a pretty broad place, and he does go into these examples, which he in the book of these claims is a very brief summary. Let's see, Belfast, seeing whole streets burned out by sectarian warfare between different sects of Christianity. Let's see, there's an old Belfast joke about the man stopped at a roadblock and asked his religion. When he replies that he is an atheist, he is asked, Protestant or Catholic atheist? Because that, of course, is the labels that are the most important kind of during that war. And he says, when I first saw Beirut in the summer of 1975, it was still the Paris of the Orient. Let's see. It also suffered from a positive surplus of religions, all of them accommodated by a sectarian state constitution. The president by law had to be a Christian, usually a Maronite Catholic, the Speaker of the Parliament a Muslim, and so on. This never worked well because it institutionalized differences of belief as well as of caste and ethnicity. As an example, the Shia Muslims were at the bottom of the social scale, and the Kurds were disenfranchised all together. See, I'm kind of flipping through, but I think overall you sort of get the point, right? He definitely has examples of where just because somebody says that they're religious means that they're going to be peaceful. It's just not necessarily the case.
I was listening to a show today about the Klan wanted universal health care. Like, really? Like, that's a great idea. But you also want to be like, oh, I agree with the Klan. Oh no. A good idea is a good idea, but it's hard. It's hard to accept it when you look at the source. I won't go through the Bill Maher diatribe again, but it's definitely one of those where. Anyway, labels, right? So we labels. I just go right back to that without any kind of segue. I'm just trying to refocus. Hey, we have geese. So I'm sorry, they're Canadian geese. Gooses? I think it's gooses. I have to watch that episode again. We attribute things to ourselves and to other people and to everything that we then treat as enough. That's enough information, right? And I know that there's been a lot of that, certainly a lot of that expressed online recently, given the election, and a number of posts about families really kind of being torn apart by it because they voted for, truly one of the most horrible people that currently exists, just as a human being. I could definitely go through a bunch of the reasons why that's a problem, but I think we're all pretty much on the same page, or we're all aware of those discussion points. But it's just, are you MAGA? Yeah, well, I'm not talking to you, right? We'll have nothing to talk about. And look, there's certainly a emotional need, I think, to be able to accept that is a possibility and potentially a reality. I know there are people that I won't ask about politics anymore because I'm pretty sure I'm going to erupt. I'm pretty sure I'm going to just start lashing out with all the reasons why it was a poor decision on their part. It was detrimental. It'll be detrimental to them. It'll be detrimental to others. But there's not a lot of point, there's not a lot of purpose in that. But if they can't have a reasonable conversation and you can't have a reasonable conversation, then maybe it's not worth it, right? It's not worth it. So in some respects, right, you do at least get a sense of, okay, if you are at this level of political beliefs, I'm gonna judge that. I'm gonna, in some respects, prejudge that, because all I know about you is you got that hat on. I don't think we're gonna have a good conversation. I also believe that's because there are a number of other things beyond the political arena that I'm going to definitely disagree with you on. So I'd rather not spend my time or your time trying to figure that out, trying to, verify my thoughts on the matter. But it is still a good idea, I think, to consider the idea that a single label does not define a whole person. And yeah, even, your name, sure, your name is probably the most generic signifier that individualizes you. But you fit into other categories, other labels can be applied to you. And a lot of that really only matters because of context. Right? What are you having a conversation about? You got your doctor. He's not going to care which way you voted. He's going to care if you got high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, right? He's going to care if you're morbidly obese, you got sleep apnea. Those are the labels that are attributed to you that he's going to care about. You know, going to the dentist would be a waste of time for me because I don't have any teeth. Although I've been told that sometimes it's good to get your gums checked, but I don't. I don't care. Uh, I have enough other problems that's not high on my list. But again, a lot of it becomes contextual. Um, and then how far do we go down the categorizations? I remember one of the school bullies once asked me if I was Catholic, and I just said yes. I wasn't. I never have been, and I never will be. But I didn't feel like, I don't know, getting beat up. I had no idea why he was asking me or how much trouble it was going to cause me. So I just agreed. But even just saying the idea of just, I'm a Christian. Like, technically, the acceptable language around me is that I'm an atheist. And I don't like it. It's not quite correct for me. I mean, I don't necessarily live with a theology, but more to the point, I consider myself broadly more an atheist because I live without a deity, without a God, right? I feel like a theology is on some levels of philosophy or even a personal philosophy. And I like to think that I have one and that I'm trying to build one, worth having, worth teaching my kids, worth writing about. I missed that. Are you kidding me? Dang it, I shaved today and I missed part of my face again. Just in the back. I thought I got that. So I'm really annoyed about that. I really tried to do that correctly and I screwed that up. Well, that's annoying. I'll have to get something while I'm out. Take care of that if there's time. But, atheist becomes a conversation. So a lot of times what I'll just do is I'll just say I'm a non-believer. I feel like that's just simpler. If they want to probe more, they can. But I feel like that it's sufficient enough for them to then make their assumptions that, whatever they want to, right? But at the very least, I don't believe in what they believe. So we oftentimes have to be careful. We think about some things in the technicalities. I've had conversations with believers where they're like, you seem to assume like I'm like every other believer. I'm like, well, I don't mean to. The way that I grew up was very kind of specific and still pretty judgmental. I don't know that you can be. I don't know that you can identify as something with which you believe is a big part of your identity and then not have an opinion about how other people do it. Right? Oh, they're not real Christians. Or, oh, they're at a dead church. Which is funny to me, especially given the hate to the Pharisees and Sadducees about trying to be legalistic and have a real absurd sense of religiosity about the belief system. You have to do things a certain way. You have to do things ritualistically. And there's a number of faiths in and out of the Abrahamics that still have some of that, right? Where you have to live a certain way. You need to pray specifically. It's just that there's a lot of the ritual, and ritual is a whole other discussion. Which, if I had been a little more deeper in my Joseph Campbell readings, I'd be able to provide you some of that. But ritual. At this point, I think a ritual is like comfort food, right? You know what to expect. You believe at the very least. You know why you're doing it. And you find comfort in that. It's something that you're used to. Whether it works or not is irrelevant. Whether it's beneficial or detrimental in a lot of ways is irrelevant. I'm sure you will find it beneficial for yourself. So that, in and of itself, might mean it's not a problem. Also, all right. But a label is just a piece, right? It's a part of what makes a thing a thing. It's a component. It's a property, right? It's any of these other terms that just helps to provide some clarity, but it's not perfect clarity. And it doesn't have to be, but I think we need to be able to take a step back, right, when we hear certain things, or when we're told somebody is a thing, the whatever. Because that may not be enough to really base a worthwhile judgment on. You're probably going to still make a judgment call, but is it sufficient? Right? Is it really what you want to think of the person? It's it can be tough. I think and I don't know that I have a remedy for this, but I think that it's more difficult to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes, and then based on what they say or do as more your actual kind of judgment, your basis for your opinion on them. It takes more effort. It takes more time. And sometimes you learn out the gate that you're not gonna get along, and it's not worth the effort. And sometimes you find that you can have a conversation where you'll disagree with each other, or you find that there's still enough to work with, to build upon. Right? If we just continue to box ourselves into these categories and box others into these categories, we're never gonna meet at the broader level, the broader fact that we're all people, right? I mean, I know I keep bringing up a trans thing. I think because again, they're the people on fire right now. They're the ones that are having to deal with a lot. Not that they're the only ones. There's still plenty of racism in this country, still plenty of sexism in this country, and it's just going to get worse based on the new leadership coming in. But the pronoun thing, I mean, I think I mentioned it. I kind of like just the generic they, which we've been using as a singular for several hundred years, so it's not new to the English language by any stretch. And I don't think that's to capitulate to the trans community or to negate how someone might identify if they have a preference on their pronouns. It's just, why is this such a big deal, right? What's your name? And it's a matter, too, of are we going to get offended by the questions? And are we going to ask questions offensively, right? Again, to some extent, like, why are we asking the question? Like, what? I know we want to know things. I want to know things, right? And I think whatever people need to do that isn't, again, ideally detrimental to themselves, but certainly not detrimental to others, I'm for. I'm not going to have a problem with it, I guess, is more the point. But we miss out on potentially really good conversations and really learning something when we categorize people in a certain way and in a way that we don't like, or we trust them because of a certain label, only to find out they were not trustworthy. I don't know how many people that I've known that have said, oh, this person was nice and we got along and I thought we were on the same page, but it turns out they screwed me. Yeah, you aren't being skeptical. And you didn't really know that person. So, you were a sucker, right? Being conned is still a thing. That's another thing that I don't know that I've mentioned before, or if I've not mentioned it enough, but not everybody is going to play by your rules, right? By a way of living that you think people should be living by, right? They're not gonna do what you want them to do, whether for good or for ill. And it's not for us necessarily to judge whether what they're doing is good or bad for themselves, but in some respects, it's not even about whether it's good or bad for us. It's just a matter of, hey, let's listen to the situation, right? It's about being skeptical of what's happening and not necessarily the person. Now, if you find that this person is not trustworthy, then yeah, that's a label worth keeping. That's a label worth using, because you learn something about them as a person, rather than just, oh, well, we go to the same church, so they must be good people. Well, they're not. They're not. It's it's a minefield, right? Navigating all of this stuff is a minefield, and I realize I'm not providing a lot of direct answers on things. I think it's part of why I can't run a cult, because I don't know that I'm too wishy-washy. I don't feel like I have enough of anything to provide that's like, oh, you definitely have to do this. Okay, you definitely got to protect yourself, and you definitely should be nice to other people. That's not a lot to build a cult on, right? It's not a lot to build a following of people willing to pay me to just lay around and spew platitudes, especially because I invite conversation. I invite, not correction necessarily, but I definitely invite perspective. But I hope that what I can do is bring some ideas, some other ways to think about things, because that's all I'm trying to figure out, is how to think about things, is how to navigate this often topsy-turvy existence, deal with the cultural, societal norms, and a lot of the just stupidity of the mortal mindset. Right? We're very limited in our thinking. We're often still thinking about ourselves. Again, I think people are born selfish. I don't mean that in a negative way. We're not wired out the gate in general, right, to worry about other people. Sometimes we have to learn that. And sometimes we observe it and we see that, hey, those people are in pain. Those people have a problem. Sometimes we have to get our ass kicked for a few years at school to figure out that, hey, other people also go through this. It's not just the understanding that you're not alone, which means you yourself can find other people to help support you, but you can be a support for them. You can show them that it is possible. It's not always easy, and it's not always going to be easy or always be difficult. There's no kind of one way to do this. Knowing you're not alone ideally helps you find some tribe, maybe, right, to know that there are other people that have been through some of this stuff and can help point you in a direction. But just following my path, you won't even see the things that I see, right? Because we don't have the same set of circumstances. We don't have the same story. Like, I can just point in a direction and you'd be like, why am I going there? Right? Well, because when I went that way, it did this and this for me. Well, why did you have to go that way? Oh, because this happened to me. Well, it hasn't happened to me. Oh. So that's also part of why I try to get a little more broad, a little more vague, because if you have a core set of ideals, set of kind of personal, I've got mechanics in my brain, that's not the right word, but if you have a certain set of ideals that you can kind of process things by, and it's not vague, but you can fit it into a broader bucket rather than getting down to the level of, they're left-handed with a limp. Like, that's real specific, as opposed to, hey, they're a person. Oh, and they write different. Cool, right? It's just about understanding how to extricate some of your ego from a lot of this, and just realizing that, yes, you are an individual, you are important, but you are not the only individual, and you are not all important. Sometimes we have to give each other a chance. We have to give ourselves a chance. And I think it's worth just trying to remember that. Maybe just starting from there is a good place. Yeah. I'm sure that ended right, but I'm going to leave it for now, and when I edit it out, I'll figure out if I have to make updates. God, I really can't believe I missed this part of my face. It's so annoying.